Let's get to know more about this incarnation of the Florida Gators. Invite in now Dan Thompson, Nick Della Torre. They're part of the Stadium in Gale, Florida's flagship podcast. They are good enough to take out some time in their evening and join us here on Sons of UCF Live. Gentlemen, hello.
Hello, gentlemen.
All right.
Nick's on mute. This is a common occurrence for him.
Sorry, it's my first podcast.
Welcome in, guys. So we end up doing these shows, and we're in a bit of a bubble in terms of the fan base. We hear a lot of social media and message boards. What is your sense of the fan base at large here? Are they rooting for Billy Napier in this game, or would they just as soon see this be his last?
Go ahead, Dan.
I think a little bit of both. I think Florida certainly has not had their fair share of wins over the last number of years, especially over in-state opponents or rivals for that matter. So I think Florida fans expect them to be a better team, a more talented team, at least on paper. I do think much of the fan base is ready to move on from the Billy Napier experiment, whether it's this game or whether it's the week against Tennessee, next week, Nick, I think that might be the end of the Napier era. But, I think at the end of the day, no matter how bad Florida's been over the last, 3 or 4 years now, the game is still going to be sold out. There's still going to be a lot of Gator fans cheering. So, don't let that get misconstrued that there's going to be a lot of fans that want the Gators to win. But I think that there's just as many fans that want Billy Napier gone.
Yeah, it's almost an interesting conundrum because I think a loss to UCF would bookend Billy's career with losses to UCF. He was on the field at the Gasparilla Bowl as the new head coach, watching what team he was inheriting, and I think a loss to UCF. And I'll be at a press conference on Sunday with Scott Strickland announcing his third coach fire in 7 years. But there is a passionate fan base. This is the 9th straight sellout at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium, and none of those fans are going there thinking, you know what, I'll trade a loss to UCF if it means Billy's out of there. So at the end of the day, no one is
no one's saying that.
No one's rooting on Nitro on the sideline. But I think they would just take solace in the fact that, hey, this experiment is over if there were to be a loss. Speaking
of experiment, 2 quarterbacks. What do you like, don't like about what you've got now at QB?
Go ahead, Nick.
It's interesting because I went in the year saying, hey, Graham Mertz gives you your best chance to win. And if you want to coach next year, you need to win. But DJ Lagway undoubtedly has a higher ceiling and is your future. You need to win games to be able to make him your present if you're going to be the head coach next year. But I also thought if DJ Lagway is who we think he is going to be, he's not a 4-year player in college. And if he isn't, there's hundreds of quarterbacks that go in the transfer portal every year. UCF has a really good one in KJ Jefferson, who has a win in the swamp last year as well. So in my mind, it made no sense to redshirt DJ. And I thought you needed to get DJ spots. He needed to play meaningful minutes against Texas A&M, against Tennessee, Kentucky, and those teams. But Florida will continue going with this mix. We'll see what cocktail they mix up this Saturday. Against A&M, I think it was every other drive. 2 weeks ago at Mississippi State, it was Graham got 2 drives to every one of DJ's, so it was 2-part mixer, 1-part shot. So we're just waiting to see what kind of drink Billy Napier makes with the quarterbacks this week.
Yeah, no, I would like to see the Gators have a little bit more momentum with who is going to be a quarterback. Like Nick said, it kind of got broadcast on the TV too that Billy Napier had told the ESPN crew that DJ Lagway was going to play the 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th drives if they got that far. I'd like to see them have some momentum with a quarterback and have an idea of, hey, maybe it's every second drive, every third drive. But if a quarterback is doing really well, let's see how they do with some consistency in there. And that goes on both sides, right? I think that Graham Mertz is a talented quarterback. I think he's going to probably play in the NFL. I don't think he'll be an NFL starter, but I think that he's got a potential spot in the NFL, maybe waiting for, maybe on a practice squad. And certainly DJ Lagway, you have maybe the only thing that might be the savior this year if you're able to rattle off a few victories with any sort of hope going into next year too. So I want to see a little bit of that, but we've not been able to see great coaching in 2.5 years. So we're hoping that during this bye week that they learned a thing or two.
Dan, I'll start this with you. What's gone wrong this season for the Gators? How did things end up here where they are right now?
I think it's a culmination of 2.5 years. They gave Billy Napier more than they've given any other coach in terms of they have a football only facility. They have an indoor practice facility. They gave them the largest staff that they've had by far. We were talking about the podcast. It's probably at least double, if not maybe even triple the size of Dan Mullen's staff in terms of on-field staffers and coaches and everything else. They've struggled with recruiting and development in certain areas, especially on the offense and defensive line. They've struggled with losing some key players that are now key contributors in the SEC and in other conferences along the defensive line of scrimmage. And they just haven't really developed the players that they've recruited. And I think that that's where a lot of the optimism was going into the season. It's like, okay, now you've got Billy's guys. And the recruiting rankings were pretty good. These were guys that everybody wanted in the recruiting when they were being recruited. And a lot of them just haven't really panned out, or they haven't panned out the way that I think Gator fans have wanted them to pan out or expected them to pan out. So I think feel for the game is something that's been missing for the last 2.5 years. I think there's a lot of ego involved from the head coach. And I don't necessarily think that ego is bad, but also the inability to notice when things are going wrong to make a seismic change. And that's what you needed to do on the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the ball. And then, defensively, the Gators have just struggled for all 3 years under Billy Napier. They've run the same system, right? They got Ron Roberts' protege for the first year. He left. They got a Ron Roberts protege for the second year. And then they got Ron Roberts for the third year. And now he's like the DC. So you have co-OCs, co-DCs, 2 offensive line coaches. It's like you have all of these people, and those are like your worst performing units on the team. So that's maybe a start. We could go on for another hour if you want.
I was going to say, I can go get dinner if you guys want. I'm sure have dessert before Dan's done. Part of it too is I think Billy Napier had a playbook. He was given the first opportunity to be a head coach at Louisiana. And he was very successful. Won a bunch of games, won their first outright conference championship. And then when he got hired at Florida, all of a sudden NIL is a thing. And now the transfer portal is a thing. And I agree with him that, I think you're supposed to develop or recruit high school athletes to build your roster out and supplement through the transfer portal. The problem is Florida's rivals went and just started cherry picking guys in the transfer portal. And all of a sudden they got old. And they had veterans and they stayed old, while Florida is now a young team last year. And they frankly have missed on some guys in the transfer portal. Mm-hmm. I think last year's transfer portal class was almost an immaculate inning of strikeouts. So it's just been a slowness, or I don't want to say that they haven't tried or haven't wanted to, but just slow to adapt to a game and a culture of college football that changes every 6 months, depending on how much guys are making in the NIL. And I know you guys had somebody decide to I've played my 4 games. I'm out of here. That's a whole new thing we're going to be dealing with. I did a redshirt report for Florida looking at, hey, here are guys that if they play against UCF, they've burned their redshirt. And here's a list of 25 guys who can still play against UCF and peace out and not play the rest of the year. That's a whole new thing we're dealing with. So I think it was just a stubbornness, hey, this plan, this system worked already. It's going to work again, but everything around that system has changed.
Mm-hmm. Nick, what's the perception of UCF in this matchup? I know UCF obviously coming off a really bad loss to Colorado. Obviously, you mentioned some of the struggles Florida has. What's the perception of this matchup in this game for Gator fans?
Well, I went to UCF, so I've been called a homer all week. It's interesting. I remember on our podcast on Stadium and Gale back in June, I said, listen, no one's talking about this UCF game, but I think UCF can beat Florida. And I was shouted at because the perception is that UCF is a little brother and, you can't lose to UCF. I think this will be 25 years since the first matchup in 1999. This is a totally different ball game. You have a coach, a recognized coach in Gus Malzahn, an established coach in a long line of established coaches with Scott Frost and Josh Heupel and now Gus Malzahn. You have the transfer portal, you have NIL. These aren't the kids who didn't get scholarships to Miami and to Florida and to FSU anymore. These are really, really good prospects. They're getting guys who normally would have gone to go play in Georgia Tech or go play at Clemson. You're like, hey, just stay home. Mom can come and drive up and see you. So it's in my mind, a totally different roster. And then I looked at Florida not being able to stop the run or get off the field on third down for each of the last 2 years. And I looked at UCF having 2,000+ yard running backs and a quarterback who is the exact quarterback Gus Malzahn would make in NCAA football, college football, the video game. And I thought, this is a recipe for disaster. But Florida fans, I don't think can even conceive a loss to UCF, as much as I've been since the summer saying like, hey, this is a game you should be paying attention to because it's a bad matchup, stylistic wise. They say in fights, styles make fights. This is a bad style matchup for Florida's defense based on what UCF wants to do. But I can tell you right now, Florida fans, it's an arrogance. They don't think about UCF unless they're playing that week, and they can't fathom a loss to UCF, which I think is why I was shouted at 5 months ago when I said, hey, this is a game you need to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Nick said. I think that Gator fans still look at UCF like the team from the 90s or early 2000s or when you guys went defeated, right? And I don't know what's going to change that. And I know that, UCF going undefeated, it's easy to make fun of the national championships and everything else. But, the players you have are at the helm is a quarterback that beat Florida last year. You have multiple players on your defense and on your offense that have been recruited by Florida or played at Florida. So it's definitely a different team, but I do think, like what Nick said, it's an arrogance, it's a cockiness thing. And I think there's no world where a typical Gator fan thinks that they should lose to UCF. And we talked about it on the show this week. I mean, there's a very good likelihood that does happen. But I think the silver lining for the Gator fans at that point is if it does happen, then there's that Sunday morning press conference that Nick will be called to over at the Hefner Center.
Third time in 7 years. So it's,
yeah.
I'm getting used to it at this point.
Knights fans heard an awful lot with the arrival of KJ Jefferson, that with Arkansas, he went in and he beat the Gators. Dan, what did he do well in that game?
Yeah, I mean, he ran the ball well. Florida got beat a little bit by themselves in that game too early. Touchdowns that they gave up that put them down. They charged back towards the end, but they let KJ light them up both in the air and on the ground. They had a ton of missed tackles in that game. Just looking back, there was 15 missed tackles. Just not a good game. And
I don't know if that's a ton. That's kind of like the median.
Well, that's the median now. But
yeah.
I think it's an arrogance thing too, right? Because if you would have looked at the time, Sam Pittman was the most likely coach in college football to get fired. They had only had maybe 1 or 2 wins at that point in the year. So I think Florida fans were expecting another blowout. And then they had
black jerseys.
Yeah, the black jerseys, right? They had a weird fumble that happened when I think it was Ricky Pearsall had the ball right near the sideline and the ball got poked out. They went out and scored a quick touchdown. I think they punt the ball again. KJ Jefferson goes down the field. He just controlled the game well, especially in the first half. And then Florida's playing from at least 14 points down for most of that game. They ended up charging back and ended up missing a field goal at the end to tie the game. But KJ, passed the ball well. He was tough to get down both in the pocket and when he went and ran. Nick will tell you he probably got more stats than I do. Florida is just terrible against dual threat quarterbacks and being able to contain a dual threat quarterback. So, we'll see. I think the offensive line of Arkansas last year is probably a bit better than UCF's offensive line this year. But overall, he's still a playmaker, even if he's not, going to beat you and win the Heisman Trophy type quarterback.
Well, I can see blank stares from your face as you compliment KJ Jefferson's passing. They're like, what? Okay, he clearly doesn't know what quarterback we're asking him about. But I made a joke. I'm like, the only person that could stop KJ Jefferson was Dan Enos, who was his offensive coordinator. Dan was fired. They put in I think the wide receivers coach became the OC, had never called plays before. And I remember telling fans, I'm like, hey, how are you game planning for this? You have no tape of this guy and how he's going to call plays. And Dan literally tried to make KJ Jefferson a pocket passer. Unlucky for UCF. The only person that could stop KJ Jefferson last year is an analyst for Florida. He'll be up in the box and he can just tell him, like, listen, just keep this guy in the box. He can't throw. But yeah, it's going to be, I think maybe UCF gives you a game plan or a blueprint a little bit, but there's not a Travis Hunter. Not only on Florida's roster, but on probably anyone's roster. He's an unbelievable athlete to watch. But I think you need to – UCF plays one-dimensionally on purpose because they can run the ball so effectively. You need to make them one-dimensional in a different aspect and stop the run. I think that means playing island corners on the outside, a single high safety, and really selling out for the run. The issue then is, well, if KJ breaks contain, your cornerbacks have their backs to him, and then he starts breaking off runs. So every defense you play, there is going to be a counterpunch to that, but I think that's the way Florida will have to try to play to really sell out the run, because even when they have sold out and stacked the box, they I think have it pulled up. They have the SEC's second worst rushing defense, only better than Mississippi State. They're allowing 188 on the ground. If you take out the Samford game, because Samford didn't care about passing the ball or didn't care about running the ball at all, then Florida's giving up 231 on the ground against their Power 4 opponents this year.
Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter aside, and that's a big aside, is there something you saw in Colorado that you think Florida looks at and says, well, we could do that same thing against UCF, especially in the way Colorado contained the running game for UCF a bit?
I was surprised that UCF didn't have more success in the trenches, because I've even said this week that I think UCF might have an advantage offensive and defensive line based on what we've seen from Florida this year. And listen, Shedeur is certainly mobile, and there were times where he was getting the pass off at the last second, times where he's scrambling and creating. But defensively, I didn't see UCF getting that kind of push. I know there's a lot of zone blocking schemes, things like that, but I just didn't see UCF dominate, because even against TCU, and you can say whatever you want to say about the first two opponents, but TCU is a good team, I think. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong. And that was an unbelievable comeback. They have some bigger guys. It's not New Hampshire or whoever the first game was, but
Sam Houston.
Yeah. So I think that was one thing. And to me, the game has to be for Florida to win is to stop the run. They're also banged up on the interior. They're going to be missing probably two guys. Joey Slack, I'm not sure if he'll play. Micah Burrow, he missed the last game. And Jamari Lyons, who's going to be not a starter, but a guy who played starter reps at nose tackle. Those three guys, at least one of them, probably all three of them, won't play. So Florida's banged up inside, and the pace at which UCF runs. I think if you get Desmond Watson on the field and Gus sees number 21 at 450 pounds and just says, suck it up, guys, we are not subbing, we're going. Like he's gonna have to stay on the field, and how long can he go? So I think the pace that UCF can run with, and then the defensive line for Florida being able to match up against UCF are huge keys for this game.
Yeah, I do think that there's some vulnerabilities at the defensive back and linebacker position for UCF that I think that Florida has some talent. It's still, we don't know if Eugene Wilson's going to play in this game, but, Elijah Badger, Shim DK, Aiden Mizell, Gators have some speedy playmakers. None of them obviously are Travis Hunter, but if Florida can, protect the quarterback and be able to make some throws, I think that Florida can move the ball through the air. Their offense hasn't been bad. It obviously didn't look good against Miami, but their offense hasn't been bad this season. It's just a matter of, can they keep the momentum and can they keep scoring and not shoot themselves in the foot? And it's so often we've seen this team shoot themselves in the foot with bad penalties, with procedural errors, with coaching miscues. So if they can limit those things, then I think that Florida does match up with some of the deficiencies that UCF does have. Now, Florida's offensive line has been mediocre at best at times and atrocious at worst for much of the season, right? So now they have their solidified 5 starters. How does that look against UCF, who wants to rattle Graham Mertz? You're definitely going to want to rattle, DJ Lagway. So I think it's a pretty fair matchup, and we'll see what team shows up on Saturday.
Well, let's wrap up with this. Describe game day in the Swamp for fans who have not been UCF fans who've not seen a game there. What should they expect?
I'll go first. I'm media. Dan can give you a tailgating and drinking experience. Mine's more buttoned up, but the Swamp is really, really special. When it's going and it's going well. Now, it's almost the fans have kind of been like biting their tongues trying to get into games, and Florida's like, no, please sit down. This is actual church. Voices to a minimum, not letting them cheer about anything. But if Florida's going good, it's a really, really special place. And I've been to almost all the SEC stadiums. I would put it right up there with Tiger Stadium as the best. I think it gets louder than Neyland. It gets louder than Bryant-Denny. And then because it's a night game, if you're a UCF fan and you're there, between the third and the fourth quarter, the new tradition they started doing after Tom Petty passed away, where they play Won't Back Down. When it's nighttime, everyone puts their flashlights up. Yeah. That's a really, really unique, one-of-a-kind experience. So I think if you are nice, if you put out kindness, you will receive kindness back.
Yeah.
If you're wearing black and gold in Gainesville, but it's a really, really cool game experience, and it should be a great environment sold out.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with what Nick said. You know, the tailgating is going to be great for those of you that want to tailgate. Gator fans, from everything that I've seen, and, I went to college there, I've been going to games for, 20 plus years now. Gator fans are really nice, and they'll be welcoming. They might, boo and jeer you on, but at the end of the day, they're the nicest people that I've, seen. They're very welcoming. A lot of old money that comes in, a lot of people that are looking to give away food and drinks and everything else. What's really nice about where Ben Hill Griffin Stadium is on campus, and if you're coming, you've never been to UF's campus, it's really cool insofar as they have the track, basketball arena, and football facility all right next to each other. The brand new football facility just opened up, a year and a half, 2 years ago now. So that's a cool sight to see. But if you go right across the street, there's Midtown, which has probably got, 7, 8 bars right now that are open. Really cool place to go, really affordable drinks, especially for those that might live in downtown Orlando. And downtown Gainesville has certainly gone through a really cool emergence as well. There's a lot of new bars, restaurants, a very super walkable area, and that's only 15 blocks from the stadium. So Gainesville's a lot of fun. The weather should hopefully be okay. With it being a night game, though, the way the stadium is built up instead of out, it really does trap in that noise. And if the Gators are humming along, then it should be loud. It should be an enjoyable experience for everybody. And long live the Grog House. Yeah.
Dolly knows. Dolly knows.
I'm a big fan of Balls, the bar.
Got
to make sure.
Thank you for
clarify that. There's a bar called Balls, which is really cool. And there's another place called Salty. Call it Salty. That's what it's called. They call it the Dog now, but it's called Salty Dog. But great place to go. And then they just opened up a brand new bar. But it wouldn't be right if Nick and I didn't give a shout out to our friend Zika, who owns a place called Cantina in Ajo, right next to the stadium as well, to go check that out.
When you have a UCF Mike back on your show.
Well, yeah. I asked UCF. It was fun. It kind of got like our co-host competitive juice flowing. Because Mike came in chest out 17-0. I think he added a game. I don't even know if there would be 17. I tried to give Mike some advice. I retweeted Mike. He was asking where to park. He said he's bringing his family up. And I had to DM Mike, hey, these people are lying to you. You cannot park your car anywhere. It will get towed. He's like, really? I'm like, none of these people are your friends. They are absolutely lying to you. Gainesville is waiting to tow your car.
Yeah, I will say, there's a lot of towing companies that are out there that are waiting. But most of campus you can park at for free. Just be cognizant of the signs. If you need a pass, obviously you can't park there. I always encourage people that are coming to campus, and especially if you're going to be there, 5-6 hours before the game, the frat row and law school areas and in the grassy areas that are around that are great places to park, and they're free and you can get in and out. If not, I'd encourage you to park maybe 3 or 4 blocks from the stadium. People, will sell parking at their house to be able to meet or beat some of the traffic getting out of the stadium. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope everybody has a good time.
Nick, when'd you graduate?
13. And it's journalism. They say it's like engineering. It's a 6-year degree for sure. But I did. I started up in North Carolina playing baseball, and then to community college, and followed a girlfriend who was not my wife to UCF after community college. So it's been a while. I certainly don't recognize campus. I haven't been back in like 4 years. I went back to cover a Florida UCF baseball game. And the little strip where bars were that we used to go to was like dorms. And I was like, what is this?
But, Nick, that did allow us to meet each other. I had moved to Orlando for work in 2012, the end of 2012, and Nick was writing for Bleacher Report, and I had done some writing, and we followed each other on Twitter. And one day we just met up for lunch, and then I asked him, because I didn't know Nick was a student at UCF when him and I met, right? So we actually grew up not that far away from each other. And I said, hey, are you going to the Gator Club meeting tonight, the Alumni Gator Club? And he's like, no. He's like, I didn't know anything about it. I'm like, oh, why don't you come with me? And then, I think later that day or the next day, I was writing for Gator Country, and Andrew Spivey said, hey, do you know any writers? I'm like, I happen to know a guy. And so now Nick has become one of my lifelong best friends. Hard to believe it's been 11 years now. But if it wasn't for that chance meeting, Nick, who knows where you'd be right now?
Yeah. My gray beard says 11 years. That's for sure.
So does mine.
Bragging rights are on the line. These teams won't play one another until the 2030s if those games, ever happen. Dan, Nick, we appreciate you spending time with us tonight on Sons of UCF Live.
Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.